We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we are back at Fight Island on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi. We are here for 5 weeks, and due to the COVID-19 testing protocols over there, it's very unlikely that we'll see fighters pulling out during fight week due to positive tests, which is a great thing for anybody doing tape study and obviously betting on the fights. And to kick this marathon off, we have a double title fight event with Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa for the middleweight championship and Dominick Reyes versus Blachowicz for the vacant light heavyweight championship. I can't wait to break this card down. But just before we get into the breakdowns, I just want to talk about our special offer challenge that we are running at MMAPlay365 throughout this UFC Fight Island marathon. It's called the Golden Gamble. We have cut our annual subscription price in half, 50% off, so it's now only $150 instead of the usual $300. But there's more. If the official bets, so the bets that I personally play and track third party at betmma.tips, do not profit after the 5 UFC Fight Island events combined, then anybody who has purchased the annual subscription during this run at Fight Island will get 100% of their money back. And we will keep your subscription active for the remainder of that 12 months too. Either we profit on the official bets or you get that annual subscription for free. And when you really think about it, if we do profit on those official bets, you will likely have made that $150 back anyway. It's a great offer and it's a fun challenge for me. Get on board by going to MMAPlay365.com and adding that annual subscription to your basket. And with the Golden Gamble out the way, let's go. Let's break down some fights. And in the main event for the middleweight championship, this fight is seriously hyped. We've got Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. Adesanya is currently the -170 favourite. The comeback on Costa at +150 as the underdog. In regards to where the value is in this fight, I do think that the value slightly sits with Adesanya right now. I think if it keeps growing, I think if we see Adesanya at -180, -190, even -200, then the value will flip to the other side. The value will be on the underdog at that point with Paulo Costa. Where I see the line moving, I'm actually surprised that more money is coming in on Adesanya, because all I'm seeing online is people talk about Paulo Costa, how big he is, how much of an improvement he's making from fight to fight, and how he's the most dangerous fighter that Israel Adesanya has ever fought. So with that being said, I am expecting some money coming in on Paulo Costa throughout fight week. I think the lines will close up a little bit. I don't think it'll be anything ridiculous, but it wouldn't shock me to see Adesanya go into the fight on Saturday night at around -150, -160. But as for how this fight plays out, anybody that's been listening to my podcast and my breakdowns over the years, you'll know exactly how I feel about Israel Adesanya. I think Adesanya's a special talent. I think he's a fighter that is not only going to be one of the most difficult fighters to beat in UFC history, but I think he's going to leave a strong legacy behind him as well. And I think when all is said and done with Adesanya, we'll be talking about him, putting him in the same bracket as the likes of Anderson Silva, for example. Adesanya's obviously got that kickboxing background. He came into the UFC, he was a little green in some spells, but he was still developing. It's a new sport for him. And from fight to fight in the UFC, the development on him has just been unbelievable. He's turned into this elusive striker that is not huge for the division. He doesn't look like he packs a lot of power, but he hits hard. He can knock you out. His ground game's improved as well. We've seen him taken down. We've seen him look for triangles. We've seen him get back up to his feet. We've seen him scramble. His jiu-jitsu's good. And we've seen him defend plenty of takedowns as well, because not many fighters want to stand with Adesanya. So we've really seen everything from him that we need to see to know that he is an elite fighter in the UFC right now. I think he's a legit champion. And yes, this fight definitely poses some problems. So much so that even before watching tape, I was having a very difficult time with this fight, because although my head was telling me that Adesanya would win this fight, I just had this weird gut feeling that I can't explain, that Paulo Costa was going to beat Adesanya. He was going to win this fight and take the belt, until I got into tape. And even in tape, I was trying really hard to back this gut feeling up. You know, I really wanted this gut feeling to be accurate, but after I came out of tape, it's not as if I was completely 100% sold on Israel Adesanya in this spot. I do think that Paulo Costa is going to present problems. He is going to have moments in this fight and moments where Adesanya's going to look like he's in a little bit of trouble, but ultimately I do think Adesanya's going to win this fight. The one concern I have with Adesanya is I didn't like that approach against Yoel Romero. He looked very apprehensive, he looked really hesitant to engage with Romero, and I suppose those feelings are only natural because Romero's a beast. When he hits you, it hurts you. And I've heard that when you hit him, it still hurts you as well. So it's no surprise really, but I did expect more than what we saw from Adesanya in that fight. So it makes me think if that's his mindset when he's fighting, a fighter with brute force power and a durable fighter that can walk through your strikes, then I feel we might see something similar in this fight, and that would concern me with Adesanya. He definitely has to be busier in that fight because although he did beat Yoel Romero on all three scorecards, it was still very, very close, much closer than it should have been when you're comparing the skill sets of the two fighters from a striking perspective, because the fight did predominantly take place on the feet. But Paulo Costa presents very similar issues in this fight for Israel Adesanya as what Romero did. Paulo Costa has also got brute force power. Paulo Costa can also walk through strikes. Sure, he's been dropped a couple of times, but the dude is still durable and he'll still be coming forward trying to rip shots to your body and head. And he's also got good kicks as well, kicks that a lot of people don't speak about. However, when you go back and watch Costa versus Romero, there were a lot of moments in that fight where Costa was very inactive. When he came forward, he threw with power, he threw in volume, but he took parts off in that fight, and that's not something you should be doing against Israel Adesanya. There were moments where Romero was jabbing him 2, 3, 4 jabs at a time, and I was just getting the feeling that Costa's a little bit hittable. And then I rewound it a little bit and I went back to the Uriah Hall fight. The same thing there in that first round. Uriah Hall started a little bit sketchy, but once he found his rhythm, again he was getting the jab off, he was landing on Costa. Costa just kept on eating these punches, then coming forward. It's almost like he knows he can eat the punches, so he'll take it, shake it off and come forward. But the problem with that is not only does it drain the gas tank, but it doesn't look great in the judge's eyes. So if you go into a decision and you've eaten all these shots and you haven't knocked your opponent out, then it's not going to look great when they're reading those scorecards out. And I feel that that's a really big issue in this fight, because when he's taking those moments off, bear in mind this is a 5-round fight, not a 3-round fight, which is what we're used to seeing from Paulo Costa. In this 5-round fight against Adesanya, I do feel that Costa's going to have a lot of moments where he's taking some time off. And at that point, that's when we'll see Adesanya popping the jab out. That's when we'll see leg kicks from Adesanya. All these shots from the outside. You've got to remember as well, we're in Fight Island again now. So this is the bigger cage. If this was a smaller cage, it may have been more of a factor for Paulo Costa winning. But with the bigger cage, Adesanya's got time to move more. And he does evade strikes really well. He sees strikes coming from a mile off. His vision is honestly some of the best vision in mixed martial arts, but he can react to it, he can evade, he's elusive, he can come forward and counter, he can hit you at crazy angles. And I think with the movement of Costa sort of being forwards only, again, I think that plays into the hands of Adesanya as well. Honestly, I just don't think that Paulo Costa is going to beat Adesanya over a 5-round decision. Can he knock Adesanya out? That's definitely a path to victory for Costa. Costa's got power in his hands, but it's never normally one bombs, one punch and you're done. He normally has to hurt his opponent. His opponent will go back to the cage and he'll start ripping to the body and head and unleashing hell on them. But Adesanya won't allow that. If he's hurt and he's backed up, he'll just exit out to the side, move laterally, and he'll make his way back to the cage whilst he's recovering. And I don't think Paulo Costa is going to be quick enough to chase him down, hunt him down fast enough to apply those finishing shots. The knockout is a legit path to victory for Paulo Costa, but I think the window's small due to the question marks on the cardio, and I think it's a low percentage outcome. I'm picking Israel Adesanya to remain the UFC middleweight champion. And in the co-main event, we've got another title fight. This time it's the vacant light heavyweight championship since John Jones vacated the belt. We've got Dominick Reyes versus Jan Blachowicz. Dominick Reyes is currently the -275 favourite, with the comeback on Blachowicz at +235 as the underdog. Now, as for where the value is in this fight, it all really depends on what Dominick Reyes we get. I'm assuming we get a similar Reyes, if not the same Reyes, or if not a better Reyes than what we got against John Jones. If that's the case, then I do think there's still some value at minus 275 on Reyes' money line. However, if Reyes breaches minus 300, pushes Blachowicz to plus 250, plus 260, I do think that line then will be getting very disrespectful to Blachowicz for sure. As for where the line moves, I think we are going to hit that territory. I think Reyes will go in at minus 300, maybe worse. I think, again, we'll see Blachowicz plus 250, plus 260. And maybe at that point, we'll see some money coming back in on the other side. Who knows? But I do think Reyes is going to be roughly around minus 300 come fight night on Saturday night. But as for how this fight plays out, like I say, it's all very dependent on what Reyes we get on Saturday night. If this is the Reyes that fought Jon Jones, if this is a Reyes that's better than the version that fought Jon Jones, then I think Reyes is going to end up being the light heavyweight champion. I think he's going to run through Jan Blachowicz, but that's if we get that Reyes. The reason why I've got a little bit of apprehension and a few concerns is because after the Jared Cannonier fight, which was a great win for Reyes against OSP, he looked good in spells, but he was tiring a little bit also in spells. But he didn't look phenomenal. He didn't look like a world beater. He didn't look like a future world champion at that point. Then he fought Volkan Ozdemir. That fight was so close. And again, he looked okay in spells, and he did his job, and he got the win, but he didn't look phenomenal. And again, he didn't look like a future world champion. Then he goes in there against Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman gets knocked out after he tries to wrestle him. I suppose Reyes did what he's supposed to have done against Weidman, but there was some more impressive moments for the fact that he didn't let Weidman really control the fight at any point, and he took him out in round one, which is what was expected. Then he gets the title fight against Jon Jones, and we're thinking, he's probably not ready for this. He probably still needs some development, some improvements, and he goes out there and puts on an unbelievable performance. He brings it to Jon Jones. He looks more aggressive than he's ever looked before. His striking accuracy was sharper than it's ever looked before. He was more dominant than he's ever looked before. And for me, the most impressive thing from that Reyes performance was the aggression, the tenacity, and the volume, whilst keeping his cardio in check over 5 rounds. Not 3 rounds, 5 rounds. The developments that Reyes made for that Jon Jones fight were just absolutely phenomenal. But you've got to ask yourself the question, was that a career best performance? A once in a lifetime performance from Dominick Reyes? I'll give you a good example of that. Cody Garbrandt against Dominick Cruz. You know, Cody Garbrandt looked like a world beater in that fight. Sure, Reyes didn't beat Jones, but it's a similar type of scenario. I just need to see Reyes again to make sure that that wasn't a career best performance or once in a lifetime performance. If it wasn't, then I think Blachowicz is going to be in for a very long night here. The way I see this fight going, I think Dominick Reyes has got to be very careful early on, and I suppose through at least half of the fight, because Blachowicz packs that power. He knocked out Corey Anderson in brutal fashion in his last fight. But if Reyes plays this fight smart, he doesn't try and fight fire with fire, get into the pocket and look to trade with Blachowicz, keep on the outside, use his kicks, use his jab at range, his straight punches. He's like a sniper with his punches. I feel that that's a smart game plan for Reyes, and if he can get this fight extended into the 3rd and 4th round, or even if this goes to a decision, I think he will fare better the longer the fight goes on. When you look at the paths to victory for Blachowicz, obviously you've got the knockout, which I've just spoken about. He packs power. If he lands on Reyes, he could end his night. But then, how else does Blachowicz win this fight if he doesn't knock him out? I don't think that his volume is high enough. I don't think that his aggression is aggressive enough to really get in the face and start landing huge numbers on Reyes. When you look at the wrestling, that's potentially an option. He's a legit black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so taking Dominick Reyes down, he will have success on the mat for sure, but getting Reyes down is not that easy, and if Reyes just pops straight back up, which he's more than capable of doing, then again, it's wasted energy for Blachowicz. I look back at a couple of Blachowicz's fights that I wasn't really impressed with. The Jacare fight, I bet Blachowicz against Jacare, and I was very nervous when that decision was getting read out. Then you go back and look at the Thiago Santos fight. Granted, Santos is a legit contender in this division as well, but again, getting knocked out by Santos in the way he did, by coming forward after he started really well, making a reckless error and getting knocked out, again, it's not a good look. Overall, I just feel that there's more paths to victory for Dominick Reyes. I think Reyes is going to land the more volume. I think he's going to look the better, the more sharper fighter on the night. I think the fight is going to predominantly be in the stand-up realm. I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost on the mat. So I feel if Reyes doesn't knock Blachowicz out, he's the more likely one to win a decision, multiple paths to victory. And for that reason, I'm picking Dominick Reyes to become the new UFC light heavyweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one at flyweight. We've got Kai Kara-France versus Brandon Royval. Kara-France is currently minus 235 as the favourite. The comeback on Royval at plus 195 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I think the value sits with the underdog in Brandon Royval. I don't see how you can justify him being plus 195 at all. I think he's a fighter that definitely needs work, but also a fighter that's developing, and I think he's going to be very tricky for a lot of these flyweights to beat, and I'll talk about that very shortly. As for where the line moves, I was expecting money to come in on Royval, but it seems that money's been coming in on Kai Kara-France instead, pushing that line a little bit worse as the days go by. I do expect at some point there to be some money on Royval, and I do think that Kai Kara-France might close very close to minus 200, with Royval hovering around plus 170, plus 175 come fight night on Saturday night. But as for how this fight plays out, honestly, when I look back at Kai Kara-France's fights, I'm just not overly impressed by him, and I feel like he's a little bit overrated, and I hate to talk like that about a fighter in the UFC because he's not a bad fighter. I think people just see his ceiling and see his level much higher than what it actually is. And we'll go through the fight. So his debut in the UFC against Raulian Paiva, admittedly Paiva is a good fighter. It's a close fight. He could have arguably lost that fight on the scorecards. Then you go to Mark De La Rosa, who's no longer with the UFC. Mark De La Rosa was just not UFC caliber, so again, Kai Kara-France should be expected to beat somebody like De La Rosa, and I'd expect Royval to beat him as well. Then Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno put a clinic on Kai Kara-France. Sure, Moreno is now being spoken about in regards to the title picture. Moreno's a guy that's improved as well, but that was not a good performance from Kara-France. I don't believe it was that competitive either. And then in Kara-France's last fight, he goes in there against Tyson Nam. He beats him relatively comfortably. I'm not too sure on that performance because me personally, I'm not massively high on Tyson Nam. I think anybody with decent volume and decent striking, which Kai Kara-France has got to his credit, can beat somebody like Nam. Now he's fighting Royval. Now Royval is definitely more of a submission grappler. His striking is definitely a work in progress. Kara-France has definitely got the better technical striking for sure. But the style of Royval, I think, is going to be very difficult for other fighters to beat in this division. And the reason why is because Royval will just crash forward with his strikes. He'll throw straight punches, he'll throw flying knees, he'll come forward hard because he knows that he'll either get close to you to try and take you down, he'll either land strikes on you, flurries of strikes, pushing the opponent backwards, therefore looking good in the judge's eyes, or he'll get taken down himself, which he's absolutely fine with because he's very slick on the mat. This guy transitions between armbars and triangles faster than my eyes can see it. I have to rewind the tape every single time that I watch his fights just so I can see exactly how he's got that transition from those submissions. And honestly, I feel like Kai Kara-France has got to put an absolute clinic on him here in regards to sliding in and out of range, keeping distance, evading where possible, using lateral movement, constantly being on his toes. And I'm just not sure he can keep that up for 15 minutes. I think Royval's definitely going to have moments in this fight. I think this fight is definitely going to hit the mat at some point as well. What goes down on the mat and how quick Kara-France can get back up is a different question. But all I'm saying is I think for plus 195, Brandon Royval's definitely going to have moments. I think that if Kai Kara-France is constantly moving backwards because of these flurries from Royval, Royval might not even need the takedowns or a submission to win because the judges are going to see one fighter being really aggressive, throwing a ton of volume. Whether it lands or whether it doesn't, it's going to look good in the judges' eyes. Then they're going to see the opponent constantly moving backwards, constantly trying to struggle for space. I feel that if Royval doesn't find that submission, that he could win a close decision in this fight. The submission, though, if this fight hits the mat, That's definitely possible. And also, you've got to consider the developments and the improvements that Royval is going to be making at Factory X. He's training with some really good dudes. He's got a really good coach in Mark Montoya, and those developments are definitely going to be visible fight after fight. So I think we're going to see a better Brandon Royval. I'm picking Brandon Royval to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a short notice fight and a quick turnaround for one fighter. We've got Ketlen Vieira versus Sijara Eubanks, who fought only a couple of weeks ago. Vieira is currently the -170 favourite. The comeback on Eubanks at +150 as the underdog. In regards to where the value is in this fight, I do think that there's slight value on Ketlen Vieira at -170, but it's very, very minimal. And if that line gets any worse, then it'll completely flip over to the underdog. The value will then be on Sijara Eubanks in the spot. As for where the line moves, I do think the lines will close a little bit. I think Eubanks proved in her last fight that if you set her as a big underdog, she'll come and upset you. I think she's getting a lot of respect because of that. Otherwise, I do believe that this line would be +200, +220 for Eubanks if we didn't see her last fight. So come fight night on Saturday night, I wouldn't be shocked at all if we saw Vieira enter the cage at around -150, with Eubanks closing at around +140, +135. As for how this fight plays out, again, it's very dependent on what Ketlen Vieira we see inside the cage, because after the Kat Zingano fight and before the layoff, honestly, Vieira looked like she was a future champion. She looked like she was going to be really difficult to beat. Then she had a bit of a layoff, as I've already mentioned. She came in there against Irene Aldana. She didn't look that great against Aldana, but she was looking okay until she got absolutely flatlined at the end of the first round, which definitely wasn't a good look and definitely set her back quite a lot as well. So if Vieira is rusty at all, or if she's very nervous, hesitant, or if she's had any lasting effects from that knockout mentally, then Sijara Eubanks could be pulling off another upset on Saturday night. But I honestly don't think that's going to be the case. I think any rust that she had in her, she might have got out of that first round until she was knocked out. I think that she's not the type of fighter to be hesitant or wary. I think she'll be aggressive, and I don't think she's facing the type of boxer she was facing against Aldana, so I don't think that she's going to have any mental effects in this fight from that knockout in her last fight. I think Vieira is going to be able to implement a game plan here. Sijara Eubanks didn't slow down in her last fight, which was very interesting because she has historically been a fighter that does slow down the longer the fights go on. So whether she just had a good weight cut, good conditioning, I'm not sure. But I think Vieira is the type of fighter to be able to push that gas tank. Vieira will close the distance, she'll clinch up, she'll look to take Eubanks down, and that type of stylistic fighter for Eubanks is going to be a nightmare for her, because that is the type of style that will drain your gas tank if you have got question marks or gas tank issues, shall we say. I think Vieira is going to have success in this fight. I think Eubanks will have her moments as well, but I think if Eubanks is put on her back against Vieira, she's not going to get up very easily. I think if she's on top of Vieira, it might be a different story, but getting Vieira down is very difficult to do. I think Vieira stylistically has a good fight ahead of her in Eubanks. I think she will be able to get off on some strikes early. I think she will have the time to feel her way into the fight. If there is any rust, get that out of the way. But ultimately, I see her scoring takedowns down the stretch, and I see her riding that top position, getting in that control time. And if she doesn't finish Eubanks along the way, which I'm not sure she will, I think she'll be the one looking better in the judges' eyes. I'm picking Ketlen Vieira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an absolute banger, in my opinion. A great matchup stylistically from either side. We've got Hakeem Dawodu versus Zubaira Tukhugov. Tukhugov currently the -115 favourite, with the comeback on Dawodu at -105 as the slight underdog. Now, where the value is in this betting line, it's one of those fights where if you've got a good read on either side, then either side is playable for sure. Both the lines are really close, so there could be value depending on what sort of read you've got on the fight. As for where the line moves, I actually think we're going to see a little bit of fluctuation here, because in the short term, I can see money coming in on Tukhugov. I think we could see Tukhugov go to -125, which he is in some spots, maybe -130, -135. But at that point, I think money will start coming back in on Dawodu, and I think we could see that come all the way back in. And I honestly don't think it's going to close too far from where we're at right about now. As for the stylistic fight itself, As I've already mentioned, it's a great fight stylistically. We've got Dawodu that has the Muay Thai background, good striker, quick striker, powerful striker. And then you've got Tukhugov, who's predominantly a wrestler. Great takedowns, good entries on the takedowns as well. Smothering topside game, which you'd expect from most Russians. So the styles clash really well. But I think that although Tukhugov's wrestling is very good, I honestly think that people don't speak about his striking as often as what they should. The guy isn't the type of striker that Dawodu is. He hasn't got that sort of technique. But Tukhugov's really aggressive, and when he lands, he will drop you or he will knock you out. In his last fight against Aguilar, sure, Kevin Aguilar isn't the fighter we thought he was going to be, but one thing that Aguilar had and still has is solid durability, the ability to eat a shot, and if you are going to knock him out, it's probably an accumulation of strikes over 10 or 12 minutes and he'll get finished late. But no, Tukhugov goes in there and he finishes him in round 1. And then the fight before that, Lerone Murphy, he dropped with a left hook in the first round, so you can't discredit the striking of Tukhugov. Like I say, the volume isn't as high as what Dawodu's is, but what Tukhugov does is he's patient on the outside and he comes in short bursts with 3 or 4 punch combinations, and then he'll back off again if he doesn't decide to level change into a takedown. But what Tukhugov's got to be really careful of in this fight is he doesn't get too aggressive, because if he gets too aggressive, I think that Dawodu is going to start to time counters. I think he'll start to pick up the numbers of volume as well. Dawodu packs power himself, so Tukhugov's got to be careful, even though Tukhugov is relatively durable. If this fight goes the distance and Tukhugov has spent most of the fight on the feet, he's going to lose. But I think the wrestling is the key difference in this fight. If Tukhugov goes to the wrestling, I don't think he'll get Dawodu down straight away. I think Dawodu will defend takedowns. On the couple of takedowns that Tukhugov does get, should he get, I think Dawodu will be able to stand back up from them. But I think eventually, if Tukhugov keeps pressing and pressing with the takedowns, I think he will eventually start to get Dawodu down at will. And at that point, Dawodu will struggle to not only defend the takedowns, but get back up to his feet as well. But that's if Tukhugov mixes in that wrestling, because against Aguilar in his last fight, he didn't look like he wanted anything to do with the wrestling. So that is a little bit of a concern. But ultimately, I think if he doesn't go to his wrestling, he'll start falling behind in the fight. If he starts falling behind in the fight, I think he'll recognize it. And then the second nature will kick in. And then at that point, I feel like the takedowns and the wrestling will come. I think he'll be dominant with it, should that happen. And I think when we get to the judges' scorecards, if we get to the judges' scorecards, I think that Tukhugov's wrestling will have developed more control time, and that should look better for him. And I think if you're looking at the finish, I wouldn't be shocked if either guy got knocked out either. So not only do I think Tukhugov's got a knockout opportunity, but I also think that he can look better on the judges' scorecards with his style. So for that reason, I'm picking Zubaira Tukhugov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Brad Riddell versus Alex De Silva. Brad Riddell is currently the minus 330 favourite. The comeback on De Silva at plus 270 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I don't think this fight holds a lot of value, if I'm being honest. I think that Brad Riddell is the rightful favourite, but at minus 330, that's a lot of chalk to play on a fighter that is only a couple of fights into his UFC career and hasn't looked completely mind-blowingly amazing. And on the other side, I don't think Alex De Silva's looked that great either. And I think there's not going to be many people rushing to that betting window to bet Alex De Silva. So for me, there's not a ton of value. And as for where the line moves, I do think that it's going to close roughly where we're at right about now as well. I could see some money coming back in on Alex De Silva just purely because the line's really high, but I don't think it's going to be enough money to really affect the betting line. So come Saturday night, when both fighters are in the cage, I think it's going to be roughly where they're at right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think Brad Riddell has got a relatively difficult task in front of him for sure, but I don't think it's a task that he's not going to be able to overcome. Alex De Silva's a decent striker. He's a fast striker. He's also got decent takedowns, decent wrestling. He's got decent jiu-jitsu on the mat when he's on top too. But when you look at Brad Riddell's last fight and who his opponent was, Magomed Mustafayev, Mustafayev is also a good striker. He's also got decent wrestling. He's also got decent grappling, but he's a higher quality of a fighter than what Alex de Silva is, in my opinion. And although Brad Riddell won that fight, it was a split decision. It could have easily gone the other way, and I don't think there'd have been any complaints. But regardless, it was a close fight, a very competitive fight. And like I've already said, it was against a better opponent than what he's got in front of him right now. So I think that's the reason why the line is so high, if I'm honest, because Mustafayev poses threats in every area, bigger threats in every area than what Alex de Silva does. I think Brad Riddell's striking is crisp, it's concise, it's sharp, he applies volume. Remember, this is the striking coach of the UFC featherweight champion Alex Volkanovski, so that speaks volumes in itself. Obviously, all fights start standing. I think Riddell is going to have a huge advantage in the striking department. I think De Silva will start to strike with him and feel his way into the fight, but I think Riddell is going to get off on a ton of volume, jabs, combinations, mixing in low kicks, mixing in body kicks, which is going to cause De Silva to start trying to shoot takedowns on him, and I just don't think that's going to work. I think either Riddell stuffs the takedowns, stands back up if he is taken down, or even he could sweep and reverse positions on the mat as well. I just think De Silva's got a very difficult task in front of him here. I think Brad Riddell has fought the better competition, specifically in the last fight. I'm picking Brad Riddell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of the legend and the future Hall of Famer Diego Sanchez versus Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews, a huge minus 750 favourite, with the comeback on Sanchez at plus 525 as a massive underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I don't think there's any value at all in the money line at minus 750 for Jake Matthews. But on the flip side, I don't think there's any value in Diego Sanchez. Even though the line is that high, I just wouldn't recommend putting money on Diego Sanchez in 2020. As for where the line moves, I do think money's going to come in on Matthews the closer we get to fight night. I think people will load Matthews up, especially on fight day, into parlays. And that sort of accumulation of betting tickets with fighters going into everybody's parlay, it will push that price up. I wouldn't be shocked to see Matthews go in on fight night at minus 900, maybe even minus 1,000. But as for how this fight plays out, I want to say I feel that Matthews has got an advantage in every area at this stage in Diego Sanchez's career. Obviously, this wouldn't be the case if it was 3, 4 or 5 years ago. But it's not. We're in 2020. However, I've said this a couple of times in the last couple of podcasts. I said the same thing with Andrea Lee against Roxanne Modafferi. I was wrong there. I said the same thing about Agapova against Shayna Dobson. I was wrong there. So, with me seemingly thinking that Jake Matthews has got every advantage in every area at this point, I'm just really interested to see where I'm going to be proved wrong in this fight. But when you look at the striking, I think although Sanchez has still got good striking, Matthews is just the more tighter striker at this point, the more technical striker. And if Sanchez bombs forward and starts trying to knock Matthews out and brawl with him in the pocket, I just don't trust that durability of Sanchez at all. Jake Matthews isn't that big power puncher. He's not the guy that's going to bomb on every opponent and knock them out in one punch. But he's still got more than enough power, I think, to knock somebody like Diego Sanchez out again at this point in Sanchez's career. In regards to the wrestling, I'm not sure Sanchez will be able to get Matthews down. Matthews is getting huge for this division. I think he's going to have a big strength advantage over Sanchez as well. And if anybody's scoring the takedowns, I could see Matthews being the one taking Sanchez down out of the two. And if Matthews gets on top, I do think he could be a bit of a problem. Matthews is a good grappler and he's got submissions to his name as well. I just don't think he's going to submit Diego Sanchez. Sanchez, in 42 professional MMA fights, has never been submitted, and he's faced much better submission grapplers than what Matthews is. So, although I wouldn't be completely shocked if Sanchez made a mistake on the mat, Matthews locks up a choke, I just don't see it being a high percentage outcome. I think Matthews should be comfortable wherever this fight goes, especially with it being Diego Sanchez in 2020, as I've now mentioned 3 times. I think Matthews has got advantages. I think he's a heavy favourite for a reason. I'm picking Jake Matthews to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Shane Young versus the newcomer, Ludovic Klein. Shane Young currently the minus 130 favourite. The comeback on Klein at plus 110 is the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think the value sits with the underdog. And Klein was plus 150, plus 135 a couple of days ago. A lot of money seems to have come in on him. I do agree with that line movement, and I do still think there's some value on him at plus money for sure. As for where the line moves, I think we might see Klein come into plus 100, which he is at some books, minus 105. It might even go to a pick'em. But I think if it does get that close, I think more money will start coming back in on Shane Young. And at that point, I could see this fight closing roughly where we're at right about now. As for how the fight plays out, for anybody that follows the regional scene, you'll know about Ludovic Klein. He's a fighter with a solid 16-2 record. He's got good experience. He's fought in many different promotions against different styles of fighters. He last lost in 2017. He's currently riding a 7-fight win streak. Many of us in Europe compare him to Mirko Krokop as well. He fights in a southpaw stance. He's got a deadly left head kick, just like the man himself. But he's not all about that head kick. He has got good hands. He slides in and out of range really well. And one thing that I really like about Klein is he never looks like he's not in control of the fight. He never looks like he's falling massively behind. He never looks like he's getting dominated. It always feels like he has that element of control in his fights, which is really good to see. Shane Young, on the other hand, I think Shane Young's going to have problems in this fight because although Young is a very technical striker, and Young will have moments in this fight, by the way, along with the problems that I think he's going to have as well. But the biggest issue for me is if this fight gets extended and we see round 2, late into round 2, round 3 as well, I think Young starts really well. And I definitely think that he's got opportunities to land on Klein and potentially finish him in the first round. But the longer the fight goes on, it does feel like Young fades a little bit, even when the activity isn't relatively high. The volume drops the longer the fight goes on. And what tends to happen is Young is an aggressive fighter by nature. He likes to be the one coming forward. Klein doesn't mind fighting backwards, so I could definitely see that scenario, especially a scenario where the forward fighter, the aggressor, is looking better in the judge's eyes. But more often than not, that fighter also has to back that up with clean and clinical volume, and I don't think Young will have that second part. Because what tends to happen when fights get extended is Young still comes forward, but he wings sloppy punches, he keeps his hands low, he's available to be hit, and once he starts getting off on a couple of punches, he'll start stringing together long combinations again when he's tired, and those combinations will be very slow and very laboured, and sure, that'll work against fighters like Austin Arnett, like Rolando D, but Klein is just better than that. I'm not sure Klein actually knocks him out with one of these left head kicks. He has got power in his hands, so he could knock him out with his hands as well. But again, I'm not totally sold that he does finish Shane Young. Shane Young isn't a terrible fighter. But I do think that if this goes the full 3 rounds, if this does go to the scorecards, I think Klein will just look better over those 15 minutes. I think he'll land more volume. I think he'll have the bigger action strikes as well, which judges like to see. So yeah, I feel Klein is the more likely fighter to win a decision, and I feel like he's the more dangerous fighter out the two as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ludovic Klein to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got William Knight versus Aleksa Camur. Aleksa Camur currently the minus 170 favourite. The comeback on Knight at plus 150 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think that there's slight value on the line of Aleksa Camur. I think if this line gets worse, if we see minus 180, minus 190, even minus 200, like I've said previously in this podcast, I think at that point the value will switch on to the underdog. The value will be on Knight if that line does get much wider. But as for where the line moves, I actually think we're going to see money coming in on Knight the closer we get to fight night. I think people will like Knight as an underdog in this spot. I don't think Camur was overly impressive against Justin Ledet, who people also aren't that high on in Camur's last fight. So I think the money will come in on Knight. I think the lines will close up a little bit. I don't think we'll see Camur at minus 130, minus 125, but it wouldn't shock me to see Camur close at minus 145 or minus 150. As for how this fight plays out, ultimately I am picking Aleksa Camur to win. The reason being is I'm just not completely sold on William Knight yet. I feel like he's got more to give, but I haven't yet seen it. And I'll give you an example. You go back and watch the Rocky Edwards fight. This was only 2 fights ago. The fight was a slow-paced fight. There wasn't too much action from either side. I thought both fighters were waiting around way too long. I thought there was opportunities for Knight to really explode forward and land something hard or really make a statement in that sort of fight. It was a perfect fight for him to make a statement in, and I just came out of tape study really underwhelmed. And then when you're moving on to Camur against Justin Ledet, again, a lot of people expected Camur to run through Ledet, but Ledet is a veteran. He'd had experience and he was able to put up a much better fight than what people thought pre-fight. Camur still won the fight. It was still a good win for him, but Camur showed that he's still a little green. It was obvious that it was Camur's debut. He showed those UFC debut jitters, but I do think that there is a good technical fighter inside of Camur. He was throwing strikes he shouldn't have been throwing, like spin kicks to the head and big action strikes, and really wasting a lot of energy early on with nothing really connecting. But those things can be ironed out really, really easily, especially as a fighter is young and is developing and he's training with Stipe Miocic. So that's a perfect guy to really get those mistakes and that greenness out of your game. So I do feel that Camur is a good technical striker. I just feel he has to develop, but I also feel that we will be seeing those developments from fight to fight as well. And although I'm sure William Knight will be improving also, I just left the tape in this fight thinking, what happens if William Knight doesn't knock Camur out? And what are the chances of him knocking him out? Personally, I don't think that Knight has extraordinary power. He's definitely got power for sure, and when he wings, it's going to hurt. There's no denying that. But does he have that one bomb power that is going to absolutely flatline Camur should he land it? And that's if he does land that one clean, hard punch that lands flush. I'm not convinced. So if that doesn't happen, what happens if we go to the scorecards? Do I think William Knight puts up bigger numbers in volume? I honestly don't think so. I think Camur is going to have the more volume, being the more technical striker. Do I think that Knight is going to take Camur down? It's a possibility, but I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost with Knight pursuing takedowns and having top control time. I think Camur will get back up to his feet. If anything, I think Camur's the more likely to have the more success on the mat. But again, I don't think it's going to be won and lost on the mat. I think it's going to be a striking battle. I think Knight's going to be the one trying to land a big punch on Camur. I don't think that punch comes. I think Camur shows that he's the more technical fighter on the night. I think he racks up the numbers. And although Camur could find a finish along the way, I think if it hits the scorecards, then Camur's the more likely fighter to win. I'm picking Aleksa Camur to win this fight. And in the next fight in the heavyweight division, we've got Jeff Hughes returning against the also returning Juan Espino. Juan Espino, currently the minus 280 favourite. The comeback on Jeff Hughes at plus 240 as the underdog. As for where the value lies in this fight, initially I thought the line was way too wide, but after tape, I do think that the line is very fair on Juan Espino. I also think Espino could be used in parlays as well. I think there is still some value at minus 280 for sure. As for where the line moves, I think we will see Espino hit the minus 300 mark. He might even close up at minus 350. I do think this is a bad stylistic fight for Jeff Hughes, and I do think that Juan Espino's got the bigger qualities in this stylistic matchup also. But as for how the fight plays out, I think wrestling is going to play a big part in this fight from Juan Espino's side. Espino's actually got decent takedowns. He's got good entries. He gets in on the legs really well, and he's got no problem lifting any size heavyweight. The dude is strong. Once he's on top, he's got a very suffocating, heavy top pressure wrestling game. And these big men, these heavyweights, when they get put on the back, unless you're a really good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist such as Alexei Oleinik or Fabricio Verdum, you're not going to get back up to your feet very easily. And Juan Espino makes that task even harder just with how heavy he lays and how much he suffocates his opponents whilst he's on top. I honestly hate to say this about fighters. I don't like it, but I'm just being truthful in my own opinion. I don't think Jeff Hughes is UFC caliber. I'm not sure how many fights he can actually win in the UFC. And unfortunately, I don't think this is a fight he's going to win either. I don't see him posing too many threats to Juan Espino unless heavyweights be heavyweights and he just lands a hard punch on Espino and knocks him out, which is a possible outcome. Again, with it being at heavyweight, I just don't see it happening though. I think Espino's going to come out. I think he's going to wrestle straight away. And I think he's going to take Jeff Hughes out somewhere along the way. I think Hughes will tire. He might get back up to his feet once or twice. But I just don't see him being able to stop the takedown takedowns for a long period of time. I think once Espino establishes that top position, he'll find a finish on the mat. I'm picking Juan Espino to win the fight. And in the final fight of this breakdown, we've got Khadis Ibragimov versus Danilo Marques. Ibragimov currently the -165 favourite. The comeback on Marques at +145 is the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I don't think there's a ton of value because of the type of fight it is, which I'll explain very shortly. But if I am talking value, there's definitely more value on Marques at +145 as the underdog than laying the juice at -165 on Ibragimov. As for where this line moves, I think we are going to see some fluctuation of where we're at right about now. So I do think more money will come in on Marques. I think once Ibragimov gets a little lower, more money will come back on him and it'll probably close where we're at now. As for how this fight plays out, it's going to be a very interesting fight and a very fun fight as well. I think Ibragimov's going to come out very hard, very fast. I think he's going to put Danilo Marques on the back foot. I think Marques will be backing up a lot. Ibragimov looks to be the faster fighter, the fighter with more movement, and like I've said, the more aggressive fighter as well. But where this fight changes, if Ibragimov doesn't get Marques out of there early on, Ibragimov's going to tire. Once he tires, Marques, I think, will close the distance. I think Marques will take him down, and there's a big chance that Marques submits him on the mat. I don't think Marques is a phenom on the mat, but he's definitely got decent Brazilian jiu-jitsu and good enough jiu-jitsu to submit Ibragimov, especially a tired Ibragimov. Even if Ibragimov tires Marques out during that initial early spell where Marques is having to weather a storm, Marques can still tie up and get takedowns when he's tired. And then when he's on the mat, he's a lot more comfortable. He's expending less energy. And then the positions, the transitions and the submission attempts can come. So I actually think that Marques might be able to weather that early storm from Ibragimov. And there's a chance that Ibragimov doesn't throw that early storm at him either. If that's the case, then that should allow Marques to get takedowns early on in the fight. I'm siding with the underdog here. I think his path to victory is a little stronger and you don't have to worry about that path to victory disappearing once he's gassed out, which you would have to be worried about if you're taking Ibragimov in this fight. So I'm picking Danilo Marques to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it. And once again, guys, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to the MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long fun shot parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. And we also support the DraftKings and FanDuel players with our daily fantasy sports content too, which comes with our very own private chat room so you can chat to our expert throughout every fight week. Remember, we've got the Golden Gamble Challenge running with our annual subscription at only $150. If we don't profit over the 5 UFC Fight Island events, we'll give you your money back. We have plenty going on at MMAPlay365. We've got plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.